Hello everyone, this is Fatih Andom. The show is a production of Asmarino and Eritrea Digest. Asmarino.com is celebrating its 23rd anniversary today. So congratulations to Tasfaldet and all his colleagues. We're going to start the show. We have two guests today. First one is Nathnael Brahane Yufru. Born and raised in Addis, Ethiopia, Nati is familiar to Eritreans and Ethiopians on social media, where he has a large following. Formerly with Ethiopian media, he's now a public relations professional. He can always be expected to try to influence all developments in Ethiopia. He completed his undergrad studies at Henderson State University and his graduate classes at University of Arkansas. He lives in Washington, D.C. area and travels to Ethiopia frequently. Welcome, Nathnael.
Thank you for having me.
And the second guest we have for today is Samuel Amaha. Born and raised in Asmara, and like most Eritreans his age, he began attending the Warsai Kalo military school when he was 17. After graduating, he served for a year as a teacher until he was transferred to Eritrea Institute of Technology, Amaha, where he was also an instructor at College of Arts and Social Sciences in Adayeh, a doctoral candidate in history at Queen's University. Samuel currently lives in Kingston, Canada. Welcome, Samuel.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So today we're here to discuss the conflicting official narratives of Eritrea and Ethiopia and their pitfalls. To start our conversation, the countries Eritrea and Ethiopia, there is a lot of misconceptions or misunderstandings, like both parties feel is happening, and we're going to look back at history and see if there is anything that can eliminate what is going on with these two countries and these two beautiful people that are neighbors and in the Horn of Africa generally. So just to start off, imagine you're meeting somebody who's not familiar with the very long, complicated history of these two countries, and they don't know anything, and how these countries came into being, the values they espouse, and just even thinking about the official narrative. How would you tell this person the official narrative of this country, and just the borders, the people, the languages, ethnic groups, however they are defined in this capacity, the country's friends and foes? How would you introduce someone to Ethiopia or Eritrea?
For somebody who, just to give a synopsis of Ethiopia, I would say that this is one of the most ancient countries in the world, with very diverse people, with religions that are the most diverse. A country that has accepted all three Abrahamic faiths probably as early as the Israelites themselves. As I always proud to say, as you can imagine, that this is a country that has never been colonized. This is a country that thought of not only just never been colonized, but thought of colonization to the end. I would say that this is a country of great athletes, a country that actually have been misjudged by a lot of people, by different wrong narratives, which some of it we'll be talking about today. This is how I would describe it.
I want to make a little caveat before I try to respond to your question. You asked me if I can introduce the official narrative about Eritrean history. By official, if you mean a state-sanctioned narrative, in Eritrea it's a little bit different because the state-sanctioned narrative is almost similar to the kind of literature that we have about Eritrea, even by people by scholars who are not necessarily at the service of the Eritrean state. So this what I'm going to tell you is not necessarily official or state sanctioned, but I will try to give you a little schematic structure of the mainstream Eritrean. I prefer mainstream Eritrean narrative instead of state sanctioned or official narrative. So to begin with, the pre-colonial period, the pre-Italian period, the consensus among historians, especially who work in Eritrea, is that Eritrea was a frontier state, and as a frontier state, it was a battleground for rival imperial forces. On one side, the Abyssinian state; on the other side, the Sudanese Funj state; on the other side, the Ottoman Empire, who had a foothold along the Eritrean Red Sea coast. So basically, this creates a situation where no foreign power, no Abyssinian state, no Ottoman Empire, no the Funj Sultanate or the Funj state was able to create a consistent administrative structure or a consistent occupation in Eritrea. So it was basically a battleground, and that is the when it comes to the political history of Eritrea in the pre-colonial Italian period. There were moments where the Abyssinian state was able to sort of create a temporary occupation or occupational force or instill occupational force in the Eritrean highlands. And there were moments when the Abyssinian state was able to forcefully, most of the time, collect tributes. There was also moments for the Ottoman Empire to sort of create briefly a direct occupation, especially along the coastline. But eventually they didn't even stay long. They devolved their power to a local chieftains. They are known as naibs. And on the other side, the Funj Sultanate from Sudan was not able to also create a permanent administration in Eritrea. So basically, we have a space where you don't find any permanent political control. That said, Eritrea had also, culturally and commercially good connection with the Abyssinian hinterland, with Sudan, and across the Red Sea, and all the confluence of, and this creates a condition where commodities, cultures, religions, and peoples were moving to Eritrea and moving outside Eritrea. So kind of Eritrea was a kind of a melting pot for different cultures, different peoples, and different forces. By the end of 19th century, as part of the general European colonial scramble in Africa, what we know today as Eritrea was occupied by Italy, and this was made possible because the different communities that were living in Eritrea were suffering from different kinds of catastrophic problems, including famine in 1888 and 1889, and they were also suffering from a very catastrophic, very bloody conquest from different Abyssinian feudal lords like Wube, Sabagadis, Ras Alula. And this had a very devastating effect on the capacity of Eritreans to resist a foreign power like Italy. So it was easy for Italy to make its colonial inroad in Eritrea and create what we know territorially, what we know Eritrea today. So that's also how Italy created Eritrea in 1890, and consequently entered into treaties with the Abyssinian state, with the British in Sudan, to delineate the Eritrean territory. The Italian colonial state stayed for almost close to 50 to 60 years in Eritrea until 1941. And during this time, the Italian colonial state had dramatically changed the socio-economic composition of the Eritrean society. It put infrastructural and transport structures which connected different communities. It created urban centers like Asmara. Not only created, but structurally reconfigured some of the existing urban centers. It created new urban centers like Mendefera, Baruntu, Tesene, and many urban centers. This created a condition, a structural condition, a socio-economic condition conducive for the emergence of nationalism, which was articulated in 1940s by Eritreans who were educated during the Italian colonial period. To the British occupation between 1941 and 1952, this was very foundational for the emergence of Eritrean nationalism. This was the decade when Eritreans got a chance, the only time in their history when Eritreans got a chance to articulate what they want and to also formulate the sort of political system they want to live under. So it was a very fertile time. It was a fertile decade for Eritreans to really engage in the formulation of the future they want to live. A significant number of Eritreans opted for independence. Similarly, a significant number of Eritreans also opted to unite with a neighboring country, Ethiopia. Many forces, many factors, many considerations that informed the political imaginations, the multiple political imaginations that Eritreans were articulating at the time. Those who opted for independence, independent Eritrean nation, were making their argument that Ethiopia, we cannot join Ethiopia because we are, by far better in terms of economic conditions. We want to create a society, a democratic society where everybody is considered equal, where everybody participates in governing themselves, where people elect their government. And we have, a neighboring country which doesn't really subscribe to this kind of political arrangement. So they were saying, like, we have a program, a liberal program, and that liberal program can only be possible if we have our own independent state. And there were Eritreans also, for instance, the Tigray-speaking Eritreans, who had a very radical social emancipatory program, and who thought that an independent Eritrea could be the best option for them to realize such socially radical emancipatory program. So this is during the British occupation between 1941 1952, but ultimately Eritreans didn't get the chance to determine their future, so they were divided. They had different political visions, and the United Nations decided to create a federal arrangement where Eritrea becomes part of Ethiopia, but with a certain kind of autonomy, a democratic government, with parliament, with free press, with its own flag, with its own constitution. This was decided in 1952, and this federal arrangement stayed for a decade between 1952 and 1962. But Ethiopia, from the beginning, didn't like the arrangement. It was forced to accept a political arrangement which didn't really suit to its monarchical, archaic political configurations. So, from the day one, it started with the collaboration, with active collaboration of some Eritreans. It started to erode the federal arrangement, and it started to go after the free press. It started to go after the judiciary system, independent judiciary system. It started to go after the parliament, and started to directly intervene into the independent administrative works of the Eritrean government. And by 1962, even though it didn't have a legal autonomy to do so, a legal jurisdiction to abrogate the federal arrangement, Ethiopia, again with the collaboration of some Eritreans, totally made the federal arrangement null and void. and it incorporated Eritrea into the Ethiopian state, and Eritrea becomes a province. And obviously, Eritreans didn't like this. They started an armed struggle in 1961. They waged a brutal revolutionary war against the Ethiopian state, which had, enormous support from all kinds of global powers like the United States, the Soviet Union, and what have you. And they fought bravely against all odds, as it were, and they got their independence in 1991. They conducted a federation, rather a referendum in 1993, and 99.9% of the Eritrean society opted for independence. So this is sketchy official narrative of the Eritrean history, if you like.
Nati, does the official Ethiopian narrative, or as Sami put it, the mainstream narrative, like can you give us like a brief overview of the Ethiopian narrative?
Well, that was the longest narrative synopsis that I've ever heard, to be honest with you. You didn't expect to hear the entire history of Eritrea starting 400 years ago. We do have a narrative of Ethiopia, the one that I gave you earlier. It's a very old country. We say 3,000 years, and we are very proud of to say that. But when we say 3,000 years history, we're talking about Aksum, we're talking about Yeha, which also is a history of Eritrea. Although, unfortunately, many prefer to sort of deny it. It's a great history. I'm sorry that they choose to disassociate themselves with it, from it. The story of Aksum is part of Eritrean history. It's as much Eritrean history as it is Ethiopian history. But because of the 30 years Bush Wars, I do believe that. I may be wrong, but narratives have been concocted in the bushes just to make sure to create a sense of nationalism to Eritreans. Aspects of their own history have been taken out from that narrative. Important history of Eritreans, including Aksum, including Yeha. Sami said that there were Abyssinians who used to go to Eritrea and occupy places. I don't know where he got that from, because as far as I know, Eritreans themselves are Abyssinians, a great majority of them. Not only Tigrinya-speaking people, but Tigray also are Abyssinians. I mean, that's just a fact. So were they occupying themselves when he said that Abyssinians were coming from I don't know where, occupying places in Eritrea? And it's these kinds of narratives which don't make much sense to me, actually create this misunderstandings between the two people.
Give our audience like a better grasp of what we're talking about. What would be the Ethiopian version of history where our audience can see where it meets, where it diverges? In
relation, the Ethiopian history is very vast. If you wanted me to talk about the Ethiopian history, I can do that. Are you asking me the Ethiopian history in relation to Eritrea? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, what's relevant to this conversation? So, so that our audience can understand, those pieces of history, and then when we go more in detail into.
A great number of Ethiopians believe that people who live in Eritrea have been, are, and will be part of Ethiopia in terms of not being in the same state, because that's impossible. Eritrea has its own state, its own country, but in terms of having similarity, it's just a fact. We do believe that Eritrean.
So Nathaniel, that is a statement, and I mean, you're more than welcome to make that statement. But before we get to that, I want to get let's say I'll give you a number, just from 1800s to now?
Oh yeah,
Like,
I
what
understand.
would be the
I
official
understand
narrative of Ethiopia, where, like, you know,
the official
how do you
narrative
make
of
sense
Ethiopia
of,
until
like, you know, from 1800 up to now, or like up to 1991? What's the narrative of Ethiopia? How do you as an Ethiopian, or like the mainstream narrative or the official narrative, sees that part of history?
in relating to Eritrea or just Ethiopian history?
Whatever floats your boat. Like, it could be like Ethiopian
Okay,
history,
well,
like from 1800, before the coming of Italians, up to 1991, the creation of Eritrea. Like, what is the Ethiopian history? Like, how do you tell that part of history? Like, you know, we have the Eritrean side.
well, we do like any other provinces in Ethiopia. Eritrea, which did not have a name Eritrea then, it was christened by Italians. Eritrea was given that name by Italians. Until then, we believe that it's been called Budri Bahari, and there were a lot of people, you can call it whatever you want. You can call them warlords. You can call them princes. They used to govern that place, and they used to actually submit to some Ethiopian kings, and that's how it was. Battles have been fought on behalf of Ethiopia in Eritrean land with foreign aggressors. Egypt has fought Ethiopia in Gura and Gundet, places that are part of Eritrea right now. Emperor Johannes, actually, who was an Ethiopian king, fought those battles. He was not fighting for Eritrea. He was fighting for Ethiopians, which at the time included people who lived in Eritrea. I can admit that there were some historical mistakes had been made when Italians came in. They should have been resisted instead of being allowed buying lands and making their way into the hinterland of Eritrea. But there could be so many reasons that afflicted the government at the time: competition for power between themselves, famine, you name it. They didn't have money to fight off. Italians were allowed to actually make a headway to buy Eritrea. And then Adwa happened, which we will be talking in a little while. So certain deals have been made that in hindsight should not have been made at the time. That doesn't change the fact that we do believe the people who lived in Eritrea in a place later Italians named Eritrea were part of Ethiopia. That was our narrative, until Italians came in. Then after Italians, I'm not going to go through what happened during their 60 years occupation, colonization, basically, of Eritrea. When Second World War happened and when Italians were kicked out, Ethiopia demanded that these places that Italians forcefully occupied for 60 years to be returned to her. In a very skewed way, Sami told the story. The United Nations decided that, let the World War II victors, the British, administer it for 10 years. Then we'll see what would happen. And the British, unfortunately, they mismanaged it. They misadministered it. They have divided the society between Muslims, Christians, Highlanders, Lowlanders. They, in the name of creating a political space, in the name of creating political parties, they actually fostered sectarianism. So by the time they left, there was this division that's been fostered by them. When Ethiopia went back to the United Nations and demanded that Eritrea be returned to her, the resistance that came from Eritreans, I don't believe that, as Sami portrayed it, it's based on need for independence or based on need for self-determination. It's largely based on those sectarian feelings that's been fostered by the British. Then the United Nations has decided that Eritrea should be federated with Ethiopia, which it did. During that 10 years, this division that's been created between ethnic groups, religious groups in Eritrea even flourished when Eritrea had its own parliament. And there were people who were actually very much concerned that if this continues, there will be a civil war in Eritrea. There will be one group annexing the other. Therefore, they have formed an organization called Mahadara Fikri Hager. I'm not sure. Anyway, they have formed that. They were concerned because they used to be threatened. They used to be told that they were not even belong in that land, in a place where they were born, they were raised, they were their ancestors have lived for generations.
Is that part of Ethiopian history? Because
yes, it absolutely is. It absolutely is, and I'm sure, Fatih, you have seen pictures that not just the elites, but the public, they were demonstrating on the streets, carrying banners saying that just don't ask us who we are. We are Ethiopian. And I'm sure you have seen those pictures. And it's not just
I'm only asking because we're trying to focus on the Ethiopian narrative, then we'll go into the
that's part of our narrative. And I was speaking to a friend the other day. He wrote an article about it, and he says that a parliament has voted, Eritrean parliament has voted to unite Ethiopia. One of the things that Eritreans today, they always say that you guys took us back. You guys drew us back. We were democratic. We used to make decisions, political decisions by democratic means in a parliament in the 40s, in the 50s. So this is one of the decisions that they have made democratically. They voted to actually be united with Ethiopia. I admit that there were some mistakes that have been made. The annexation should not have been rushed. It's the demand that the people and the elites agreed upon and voted in parliament to happen. Once it was Eritrea became part of Ethiopia. Actually, for a very long time, there was, except the very low insurgency that the Eritrean Liberation Front (ELF) has mounted, there was no problem until mid-70s. There was no problem whatsoever. The insurgency is very low, but because of problems that have happened in Ethiopia, not in Eritrea, not within Eritrea proper, but in Ethiopia, the government change came about. The military government started being brutal. That's when actually Eritreans are more motivated to go to the bushes, because they just wanted to save their lives from a military dictatorship that have been killing them because of many mismanagements that have been done by the Ethiopian military government, supported the cause of the then EPLF, later PFDJ, that made Eritrea's independence possible. That's what our narrative is.
Can I push back against some of the things that Nati said?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, first, Nati said that we, or at least the official mainstream Eritrean narrative doesn't admit some parts of Eritrea were part of the Aksumite Empire, or kind of insinuated that we dismissed that part of our history. We don't. To give you a personal experience, for instance, I was part of the history textbook writing project when I was in Asmara, and we dedicated really a large portion of the history textbooks to the history of Aksumite civilization and how parts of present-day Eritrea and parts of present-day Ethiopia were part of this civilization. So I don't know what Nati is referring when he says we don't really admit to the fact that Eritrea, or part of Eritrea, present-day Eritrea, was part of the Aksumite civilization. We do. What we don't do is we don't interpret it as the Ethiopian narrative interpret that part of our history. We don't believe that was Ethiopia. We don't believe that Ethiopia existed 2,000 years or 1,500 years or what have you. It was a different history, and part of Eritrea was definitely part of the Aksumite civilization. So that corrected, we talk about this. Okay, we don't deny this. We only have a different interpretation and different understanding of it.
I'm not sure if that's different interpretation, Tammy. I don't believe that you actually do not accept that because you're an intellectual and you're an honest person, and you probably wouldn't. But I have noticed a very large number of Eritrean elites, including the PFDJ storytellers, trying to create a separate narrative for Eritreans about the Aksumite civilization or Yaha civilization. Believing that we do believe Ethiopia existed for 3,000 years, we do believe that. And every country has a myth. And one of the points of conflict between Eritreans and Ethiopians, largely between the elites, don't try to actually dictate a narrative to us. You had a legitimate right to tell whatever story about Ethiopia when you were part of Ethiopia. Once you left it, we actually tell our own story in whatever way we want to, in how we want to. So there is a penchant with a lot of Eritreans telling Ethiopians that this is your history and this is how you should believe. That actually is usually the cause of this conflict.
To correct you on some of the things that you said, Matt. When I was referring to the history textbook project that I was part of, it was done under the auspices of the PFDJ. And I assure you that the history textbooks that we use in Eritrea for high school students talk about Aksumite civilization. What we don't talk about is we understand the Aksumite civilization in a different historical register. We don't say that was Ethiopia. It was a different political arrangement. It was a different cultural arrangement. It was different socio-political configurations, and we don't really conflate it with the present-day Ethiopia. So we don't say the Aksumite civilization is synonymous with Ethiopia or Ethiopian state. What we say is there was a political arrangement, there was a civilization, there was a cultural space that we shared, and we don't have the illusion. We don't have even a reason to erase that part of our history. We admit that Eritrea, in fact, constituted the core of the Aksumite civilization. You were talking about Aksum and Yaha, a number of historical sites, a number of core centers of the Aksumite civilization are presently in Eritrea, right? You can talk about Adlis, you can talk about Kwaito, you can talk about all the historical centers in present-day Eritrea as part of the Aksumite civilization. So that, in fact, the core of it was in Eritrea. So we don't deny this. We only have a different interpretation. We say, okay.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. The problem starts.
I'll make a little point here. We will talk about this later as the way forward. This can be like a historical material. This can be a historical stuff out of which we can find a commonality, right? This can be something that we can tap on to say, okay, at a certain point in time, we were sharing, not all we, I say we, part of us, we're sharing some cultural, civilizational, and political space. So this is a good.
No, that's perfectly fine, Tammy. The problem starts, like I said, when someone starts to dictate that this is what our textbook says, this is what we believe, but you also should believe it. That's when the problem starts, and I see a lot of it these days.
But what do you mean by dictation? Like, for instance, given your own version of history, given your own understanding of history, given your own conception of history, is not equivalent to dictating it. We can talk about this, we can debate, we can have a conversation, we can have our differences on this, but it's not synonymous with dictation. So I don't understand what you mean by dictation.
No. There is a difference between telling someone that this is what your history is and saying what your narrative of the other person's story is. Again, I cannot stress anymore. I have seen a lot of Eritrean elites saying that this is what Ethiopian history is. This, and that part is a lie. You cannot say that because we are the only ones who will be telling that. We are the only ones who will be narrating our own story.
On that note, so the narratives in both these two countries, is it accepted by everybody? One, are there specific groups or people who do not subscribe to it? And at the same time, coming back to Nathaniel's question, saying kind of countries say, this is my history, this is how we understand ourselves, and you cannot refute any of it. This is the truth for us. Does history work in that way? Can Eritrea make a claim in history and Ethiopia do the same, and then we're not supposed to question?
That's a very interesting question. Especially the first one is the narrative that I have outlined, accepted by everybody in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a very large country. It's the people with 110 million. To the large part, the narratives that I said pretty much used to be acceptable. Late 50s and 60s, left-leaning revolutionaries in Ethiopian universities who actually started a movement to overthrow the imperial system. Many of them are now part of Eritrean government. They worked very hard to reshape that narrative. And through time, they have put a great deal of dent in it. That's very unfortunate. For the last 50 years, at least, the narrative started to become, more universally, less universally accepted and controversial, but it's still thriving. That narrative to a very large number of people, it's still thriving. But I admit that there is also citizens, Ethiopians, who contend that this narrative is not theirs. The second question that you asked me, yes, a country can't say that this is my story and this is how I believe, this is my truth. You cannot actually challenge me on what I believe about myself. Say the same thing if I accept that fact from an Eritrean, if they say that to me. Tammy earlier told a very long story of Eritrea, which I don't agree all of it with. But I'm not going to challenge him because that is his country, that is the story of his country. And I am not going to, saying that, no, that part is a lie, because it's not my place. And I do expect the same thing from Eritreans. When we say that this is what we believe about ourselves, I do expect them to accept it, even though they disagree with it.
What do you say to that?
We can probably talk about this again extensively when we talk about the way forward. I, for instance, myself do not conceive myself as a spokesperson of the Eritrean state. I am a critical citizen. I am open for divergent historical discourse, divergent historical interpretation. I wouldn't be offended to listen to Nati or to another person or to a different person, given his own or her own interpretation of history. So in this, I guess, the ability to transcend the state narrative, the state discourse, the ability to conceive yourself as an independent person, as an independent individual, might be, the temperament that we need to forge forward, to create a different political imagination, to create a different sort of relationship. So that cleared. I have certain points that Nati raised that and I want to respond to. Maybe he misunderstood me. I didn't say Abyssinians invaded Eritrea or occupied Eritrea. I said Abyssinian state, and that's a difference. And probably this is an entry point to a possible discussion that we can have. What is Abyssinia to begin with? What is this designation? Is it like a cultural designation? Is it a political nomenclature? Is it what does this signify? What does Abyssinia mean to begin with? So there are obviously Eritreans now who identify themselves as Habesha or Abyssinians. No doubt about that. And I didn't say Abyssinians invaded Eritrea because, as you say correctly, there are Eritreans who identify themselves as Abyssinian. What I say was Abyssinian state. And I guess a legitimate point can be made about the difference between the Abyssinian state and the Abyssinian society. Abyssinian society meaning cultural, referring to a sort of culture, referring to sort of a sociological reality. And this probably was not all the time equivalent to the sort of political reality. So I'm not referring to Abyssinians invading Eritrea. I was referring to Abyssinian state, or at least agents of the Abyssinian state, or feudal lords maybe, who try to not invade. Maybe not invasion is not probably the correct word, but try to forcibly collect tributes from poor peasants. So that's what I mean. Another point. Nati was talking about Emperor Hans fighting for the entire Ethiopia, including Eritrea, not only Ethiopia, and that's I think problematic. Probably Emperor Hans was fighting for his own power. He was fighting for his own interest, and that's not equivalent to like the name of the cause is not nationalism. The name of the cause maybe is power. That's one point that I want to make. And another point, I think
what you just said is at the end, it's just a political view, your political view, and I'm not going to contend with it. But I do believe that as a leader of the entire country, Ethiopia, it's Emperor Yohannes' responsibility to fend off a foreign invader. The Egyptians were foreign invaders. They came, he gathered a fighting force, and he fought back. By definition, that is actually fighting for his country, not for his power. Because I do believe that if it were Emperor Menelik instead of him, he would have done the same thing. If it were Emperor Theodos before him, if that happened, he would have done the same thing. That's a definition of responsibility for a leader. But you probably have a political view about him not caring for a country but his power. You can have that view if you want, but that's just not acceptable by me or by my fellow Ethiopians. Abyssinian, the word Abyssinia for me defines people of Horn of Africa who speak Semitic languages. We do believe that Eritrea was part of the Abyssinian state. Princes who used to be in Eritrea actually, I have explained that they used to pay taxes to Emperor Yohannes at the time. So that would make them part of the Abyssinian state. So unless you're saying that Ras Alula, who was a lieutenant to Emperor Yohannes, was invading his own country, to me, there is no difference between Abyssinians invaded us or Abyssinian state invaded us. There is no difference. You can oppose the structure of the state, just like you're opposing the Eritrean government right now. There is no difference between Abyssinian state and the people of Abyssinia. Abyssinian state and the soldiers of Abyssinia going elsewhere. They were sent by state in one of their territories to do whatever the state wants them to do. Again, that's also the way we can agree to disagree.